The number one reason that your kids aren't listening to you and why you really don't actually want your kids listening to you in the first place. Now, all the parents that come to me, they say, Matt, I really just wish my kid would listen to me. And I'm sure you're similar to a lot of the clients that I work with where your life and your kid's life you think would be infinitely easier. And I agree with you. Life would be much smoother and straightforward. However, there's some unintended negative consequences that you really, I promise, don't want from that. So let's just play out a typical scenario where you want your kids to listen to you. It's either like a morning routine or when it's time for dinner and you want them to come down. You just wish that in the morning they would, go get your teeth brushed. You need to go downstairs and eat. Where's your backpack? Why haven't you packed your backpack up? Why aren't you putting your shoes on? Put the iPad down. Go do this. Go do this. Now, this is doing a couple of very bad things. One, you're getting more and more exhausted as time goes on, right? This is unsustainable for you. Two, what you don't realize is you're unintentionally robbing your kid of any sort of pride and dignity to actually persevere and to do this in their own way so that they can reap the intrinsic motivation of actually valuing what they're doing in their morning for themselves. And three, it sets them up to believe that every time they do something in order to move their morning routine forward, they're doing you a favor. And this is usually where a lot of the kids that I work with and the parents that I work with wind up lashing out. And if something doesn't go right when you're lecturing them and trying to tell them what to do, who do they blame? They blame you. They blame the parent, right? And so what winds up happening is all of this well-intentioned, streamlined, what you think is going to be efficient kind of approach is backfiring catastrophically all across the board because you're stuck in compliance, right? When your kids are younger, they need compliance. It's a lot smoother and easier because ultimately they're still following your lead. They're not intelligent or developed enough to actually formulate and come up with their own strategies or plans, right? However, you need to shift as your kids get older, and this is different for every child's development. Some kids mature faster than others, some are a little bit more delayed, but usually when the power struggles start coming out is where you need to start shifting to more of this accountability-based model. Because if you're not starting to shift into around holding your kid accountable, what winds up happening is you start to develop this resentment. Your kid starts to feel like they're a bad kid because they're not listening to you. If they do listen to you, they're kind of your slave. They don't feel proud of themselves. They feel like they're doing you a favor. And it leads to this overly enmeshed dynamic, which does not end well positively at all. And so by shifting more to holding them accountable and actually starting to delineate and start to hold them accountable to their own schedule or how they want their morning routine to go, you just keep micromanaging them, which just makes things infinitely worse. And you put this on fast forward, and you can imagine how this looks a year in. It's horrifying. And this is usually when the parents wind up calling me, and then they want to work with me one-on-one. It sucks. So I can tell you that shifting to accountability requires some things that are significantly different from compliance. Compliance is, I need you to get this done right now. And when you hold them accountable, it's more about reflecting on what they did, how they did it, and how it's not working for them. So this is a little bit more of a long game, more longer drawn out model on how to actually start to get the kid to reflect, start to have more personal investment and emotional energy into solving the problem. Because right now, when you're doing compliance, the parent cares more about the solution than the child. And that's never a good recipe. When you start holding them accountable, the emotional energy of who cares more tends to start to shift more and more and more into the child. Not only with just the intrinsic pride of feeling like they're getting accomplishment for themselves, but ultimately when we start holding them accountable and using some delayed consequences, you wind up creating more of a sense of understanding that when they make poor decisions, not always are the consequences going to be immediate and profound. They may be delayed, and they're more about getting the child to reflect and to actually think more for themselves. So we're working ourselves out of a job, not further into one. When you're doing compliance, this is where you just wish your kid would listen to you. You're making your job harder, and you're working yourself further into a job, not out of one. And by holding them accountable, you can still use consequences because your kid does need to have a healthy sense of anxiety and fear that if they keep making certain decisions, there are going to be negative consequences. Whereas with compliance, it looks like they're doing you a favor and they're either making you happy or miserable. And this usually leads to shame and guilt and all the horrible things that we really don't want your kid having, because those emotions around interactions with a parent are never healthy interactions, right? That's never good. So not only that, we also want them starting to sink or swim on their own and not being super emotionally enmeshed and entangled with you as the parent, because that's also developmentally unhealthy, and it's also not good for you as the parent too. This is where you start to get this like resentment, you feel taken advantage of, you feel burnt out because you're constantly doing everything for the kid, and this then sets up in motion a pattern that most moms and dads then start to feel guilty and bad, because now you're yelling, you're screaming, you're threatening, and then you oscillate between that and working out what I call Jeffrey Epstein versus the state of Florida sweetheart deals. These are where you start making out these overt kind of contract agreements with them where they're going to get something first and then they're going to do something later. And we all know when you have no leverage, the likelihood of them following through on their end of the bargain is like laughably insane, right? It's highly improbable, right? And so if you want to learn more about how to shift from compliance to accountability, I can help have a conversation with you and understand if what you're going through is something I might be able to help with. I also have a ton of free resources, and I have a free group that if you'd like, you can join. That way you can be in the loop on all these little mini trainings that I'm giving in order to help parents make this transition from compliance to accountability. I hope this was helpful, and I wish you luck in your parenting journey.